Welcome to the Global Energy Leaders Podcast, powered by R Squared Global.
Welcome to another edition of the Global Energy Leaders Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Ray, and episode 38 is really one of interest to me because I've heard a lot of people complain over the past few years saying that solar isn't really viable because of the battery technology. And so we bring on Craig Wilkins to help us look at that, as he has a kind of a unique way of doing batteries. They're not using, it's not lithium. And so I'll let Craig tell you all about that. Be sure to check out Craig's company profile and his full bio in the show notes at globalenergymedia.com, where you can find all the podcast show information. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Craig Wilkins. Craig, it's great to have you today. How are you doing?
Doing fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Okay, well, we're getting into something that's really kind of fascinating to me because I've heard a lot of talk about battery storage, and I'm no battery storage expert, and I don't know a lot about zinc except for it's number 30 on the chart, I believe. So I'm kind of not really knowledgeable on zinc and how it pertains to batteries because I'm not a battery expert. Kind of walk us through just the idea of how zinc works and where does it fit in the battery spectrum. You think about lithium and lead and all these things about battery. How does zinc play in?
Yeah, so I'm not a battery guy either. My background is in finance and economics, and one of the things most important to me was not necessarily the chemistry itself, but the economic viability of the chemistry you choose to build a battery that you expect to be taking over a large percentage of the market share. So, kind of steal a comment from Stephen Covey, I really started off with beginning with the end in mind. And that is, if we really felt that we were going to develop energy storage systems that would be widely adopted, you had to really look at a couple things here. Number one was cost. The battery chemistry had to be cheap and abundant across the world. Another thing that we really focused on was the safety. I'm sure you're aware of some of the safety concerns around the lithium battery technologies with fires and hoverboards and the Samsung phones. And so safety was another preeminent factor. And the primary focus on my side was the robust nature of zinc chemistry. We at ZAF and ViZn Energy, we really have focused on three different types of battery technologies. And the robust nature is if I team the zinc chemistry with an iron electrode, I've got a very high-powered battery that's great for power tools. It's great for heavy industrial equipment. It's great for data centers. And when I teamed it with an iron couple, basically what I was able to do is we were able to develop a great energy storage system for microgrids and utility scale storage. So as we look at what we really think is going to happen in the market space, that we're going to grow from, let's say, 450 gigawatt hours of battery storage, and that we see that going to potentially 2 terawatt hours. That's with the advent of electric cars, with grid storage starting to just hit its growth curve. You realize you're going to use a tremendous amount of materials in the construction of these batteries. So those were the three primary factors that I looked at to prove that we had what I'd say is long-term viability in the market.
Okay, I was in Zambia last year and at a Power Africa event, and they talked a lot about microgrids, but the thrust of the papers presented were around batteries and how they're going to improve battery technology. And I was talking to one of the professors who presented afterwards, and I just asked him a question. I said, "Hey, I'm not a battery guy, but what I hear is that the batteries really aren't in position to run large scale kind of microgrids or last long periods of time." And I gave him a few projects that some associates of mine have worked on and some of the problems they've had. Are we kind of getting to the stage now where battery technology for solar is becoming more viable, or maybe is that a myth that was kind of floating around out there? What's your take on the state of batteries?
No, we're there. I think when you're right, in certain areas like Africa where they've got the rural electrification programs, or when you got places where you got high electricity or unreliable power, the ability to team batteries right now with a solar or wind, and even team it up with a diesel genset to make it run more efficient, the battery technology is there where we can drive economic returns and provide high reliability on the power side. So that's why I think you're hearing so much about energy storage. It went from, boy, it'd be nice that if we had a battery that would do X, and what you're seeing is a number of technologies that are coming to the market that are really enabling the launch of this microgrid revolution that's kind of happening.
Okay, great. And I want to bring it back here stateside, just for my stateside listeners who may have heard about some of these, these batteries, and they may be looking to put solar panels on their house or incorporate that. What's kind of some viable options, and how should we think about that here in the States, where we're not necessarily going to go on a full blown microgrid, but we might say something like, well, I want to be able to power my house, through the storm. How should we look at that? How should we think about it? Is what kind of options are available using zinc powered batteries?
Yeah, so rooftop solar is obviously one of the fastest growing categories of renewable energy. And what you tend to see right now is, you're right, that a lot of these people just don't want to sell that power back to the grid, but want to use it to what we call firm that power, so that you can use it at the house itself, or that you can store it for in case there is a power outage, and then you can run the home. And what we are doing right now is we've developed a nickel-zinc battery, which can be teamed up to provide anywhere up from 8 kilowatt hours up to 24 kilowatt hours of power to run the house, and also firm up that renewable or that solar, rooftop solar. So what you tend to see is everyone's obviously pretty aware of the Powerwall and what Tesla is doing in this market. They're using a lithium-based technology. Two things where I think that we have an advantage with the tech or with the batteries that we're putting out right now is a lower cost, and also going back to that consideration of safety, that these batteries can be safely put into the basement or the garage without having any concerns of fire or anything else that would cause a damage or harm to the family.
Now, you've touched on lower cost there a few times. Why is zinc lower cost?
Well, if you just plain simple look at the cost of lithium as a raw chemistry, it's abundant in the earth. It's globally abundant, so every continent in the world, zinc is available. So from just a pure cost standpoint, you've got a much lower efficient chemistry when it comes to producing the battery. Lithium, while there isn't a tremendous amount of lithium in a lithium cell, believe it or not, we've seen a doubling of the cost of lithium. We've seen cobalt, which is used, as well as nickels used within the lithium cells. And so you've seen some price pressures of limiting the ability to bring the cost of lithium down. Whereas right now, we're at the early stage of our cost curve, and we can basically show over the life cycle of that battery, that is, how much you pay for the battery up front, how many times it'll cycle over that period of time, how efficient that battery is. There's a lot of things that come in when you start taking a look at cost, just not how much the individual piece of or individual battery costs. And so when you take a look at life cycle costs, we're significantly lower than lithium, and we're rivaling even lead acid at this point on a front end capex, but we beat lead acid in the long term when you start looking at let's say a 10-year life cycle.
Okay, so we talked about a residential type battery. Now, one of the things that again, I'm not a battery guy, but I wouldn't imagine that all the batteries that you guys make are kind of necessarily for each situation. So you're going to have a different battery or different construction maybe of the battery for different scales of projects. How do you guys work that out and figure, okay, for for a home, you're looking at this type of battery, for maybe a larger commercial building, you're looking for this, and what kind of batteries do you guys offer?
Yeah, I think that's a really valuable and a great question, because I think when you start hearing about energy storage for renewables, everyone has turned to lithium, and lithium is trying to do everything from your cell phones and laptops up to powering megawatt grid utility applications. And I think what we've really focused on is trying to find those niche markets, which they're not very niche, because with the nickel-zinc battery, we're essentially a replacement for lead acid. So anything that you've seen where a lead acid battery has been used, whether it's a backup UPS system, think about your industrial motive applications for trucks and forklifts, and what I'd say is heavy industrial equipment. Each battery has a different application. Each battery can be put in different form factors, and there are certain chemistries that perform better under different environments. And so what we really have focused on is that I've got 3 different core technologies. I've got multiple formats that we can put these batteries into, whether it's trucking or data centers and things like that. But when it comes to grid scale storage, what we focused on was real large scale zinc iron flow battery system, which is really meant for megawatt and above size type applications.
Okay, and I want to shift gears there, kind of on what you actually said. You talked about larger storage uses. Where do you see over the next 10 to 20 years energy storage going? Because there's a lot of debate. I know, and we've talked about it here about as these emerging markets become more and more quote unquote on the grid, they may not necessarily be on the grid. They could be off the grid using some of this type of renewable technologies with batteries and wind, and kind of couple some things together and never get on the grid. Which would seem to me that there could be maybe a larger expectation of energy storage because of some of these unique situations that are going to come about. Are you kind of forecasting something like that, or do you think it's going to, hey, we're going to have a quick uptick here in battery usage and then it'll level off? What are you seeing for energy storage in the next 10 to 20 years?
Yeah, I think that energy storage is the continued enabling technology to power things that today we don't even know about. If you take a look at the idea of a microgrid, everyone had a concept of it, but we went from, what I'd say is, hundreds of dollars put into microgrids into where they're now projecting this to be 120, billion-dollar type market opportunity. And I think what you're tending to see is that we're moving away from the traditional utility model where you have centralized generation from, let's say, a coal plant or nuclear facility, and then you run it through the distribution channels. What they're finding is that for redundancy and reliability, it behooves us to start looking at more distributed application, whether it's everything from a utility solar application or a rooftop solar. And the way to make, what I'm going to say is the grid play nice, is that you have to have these shock absorbers called batteries to absorb and release energy and essentially become the traffic cop of electrons so that you maintain high reliability and also do a better job of maintaining cost.
One thing I've thought about, and I'm curious to get your take on here, is it seems that even here in the States, maybe that as people go with the solar rooftop type options, if a tornado or a hurricane were to hit, and they were completely quote unquote off the grid, and you can see that being a possibility maybe in the future. Okay, well now they get the panels rebuilt and the roof rebuilt, and so they could be down for a long period of time. It seems that there might be a market segment that could emerge if the batteries could store the energy long enough to supplement people with those kind of needs. Are we close to that kind of model where you can have long-term storage, or is it still of a short-term storage model with these batteries?
You could have a long-term application for storage, let's say for 2 or 3 days. If you start talking about real long-term, I think the cost starts becoming prohibitive. Energy storage is basically a reservoir of energy to be called upon. The only reason you would do it is if that, let's say, critical infrastructure that you would pay enough to make sure that a cell tower, I'd say, is an important piece of machinery or equipment stays up. You may pay that extra dollar. But for homes and things like that, what you'll tend to see, as I mentioned, we moved up to a 48 kilowatt hour system because let's say if the average house is using 2 to 3 kilowatt hours on a consistent basis, that gives you enough time to handle short outages, but it's really not built or meant for long scale.
Okay, great. And what's been the reception of this zinc-powered battery, states and internationally speaking?
So we're in the process of going through third-party validation and testing on the nickel-zinc battery. So the nickel-zinc battery, which is meant, like I said, for trucking, for stationary storage like telecom sites, and for data centers, we're moving through third-party testing with some of the largest trucking companies and data center companies right now. And at this point, they're extremely enthused because the performance of the battery is what we said it is. It holds 2 times the capacity of a lead-acid battery. And the performance of the battery has worked out very well. As we move towards scaling our manufacturing capabilities, right now we're booked out through first quarter of 2018 with the amount of batteries we can produce today. So we're looking at raising capital to expand our manufacturing capacities. So the good news is we've got customers. That what we have right now is just a constraint on the manufacturing side that we're working through.
Well, that sounds like a good problem to have.
That is a good thing to have.
And has Tesla called?
I think Tesla's pretty wedded to the lithium market, but it doesn't mean there won't be discussions in the future.
Absolutely. Well, look, this was really informative. Like I said, I'm not a battery guy, so I always like to hear about this stuff. I remember going to the Power Africa event and listening to them talk about batteries, and I just realized how ignorant I was of this topic. You pick up batteries here and there and use them for your Duracells or your car batteries, and you think, okay, I kind of understand what's going on. And they really got into this, and I'm sure you could too, but you'd be talking above my head pretty quickly. So it's a very fascinating topic, though. And I'm always, like I say on the show, we love to hear when there's competition in the market because that's going to make batteries better in the long term. And so you guys and what you're doing, and we kind of joked about Tesla and what they're doing, but always when there's competition in the market, it's going to push you to make a better product and in turn your competitors. So that's exciting from my standpoint. I know our friends in Africa, they're always looking for good battery technology. So this is very exciting to hear about. Before we let you go, is there anything that you'd like to plug or promote?
Yeah, I think as we're moving forward here, that obviously I'm a founder of two different companies. It's ViZn Energy, which is scaling up large utility grade zinc iron flow batteries, and then on the ZAF side, ZAF Energy Systems is building a nickel-zinc battery as well as we're working with zinc air batteries. So if people could visit our website if they have any questions, obviously they can contact the office directly. I'd be happy to talk to them.
Absolutely. And we will link to Craig's bio and all of his company information in the show notes. So please check that out at globalenergymedia.com, where you can find all that you want to know about zinc batteries with links to Craig's stuff. Craig, thank you again for coming on. It was really a pleasure, and look to have you on again in the future.
All right, Ryan. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Thanks again to Craig for coming on. Really enjoyed the discussion. Fascinating stuff there. As I said a couple times, I'm not really a battery guy. I've heard people speculate. I'm always looking to learn more about batteries, but it can be very, very technical. So enjoyed the conversation there. And again, be sure to check out Craig's information in the show notes page at globalenergymedia.com. So thanks again for tuning in. And until next time, keep climbing.
Thanks for listening to the Global Energy Leaders Podcast, powered by R Squared Global.